You are joining San Diego Design Week 2021 and session by General Assembly, and we will be learning about user experience design. Then we'll share introduction about himself in a couple of minutes, I believe. My name is Gabriela. I am leading West Coast expansion for General Assembly, and as per this week, actually for the whole US, so I'm overseeing 24 cities where we are building online communities and hopefully soon having our in-person campuses. And I am from Slovakia, so hello to our Czech attendee. Vodič General Assembly. We are a technology education company headquartered in New York with 40 locations all around the world. So you can find us in London, Paris, Canada, Singapore, Australia, and all around the US, even in San Diego. We are focusing on teaching skills such as coding, user experience design, visual design, data, marketing, business, and career development. And how we actually do it? Currently, virtually, and very, very soon also in person. Before we were mostly in person, but thanks to Zoom, now you can join us from everywhere. Our main programs are 3-month-long programs for people who want to fully change careers. So even without prior knowledge, you can enroll into 3-month-long course about software engineering, user experience design, or data science. You will have very, very intense training for 3 months, career coaching, and after that, we will support you in your job hunting. 99.2% of our graduates actually successfully switch the career and find a job in the new area after graduation. On top of this, we have 10 weeks part-time courses that are in the evenings or on Saturdays about user experience design, visual design, coding languages, product management, data analytics, and more. And on top of all this, we love to do tons of webinars, workshops, just like this one. So you can join us on ga.co for all of this. And one thing that I would like to highlight for next week is actually our Back to Work, Relaunch Your Career Post-Pandemic Virtual Summit. So you can again join from everywhere, and every day we will be bringing free career workshops and webinars. All these sessions are going to be recorded. So if you RSVP and you cannot join because you are in the middle of the work or something, you can RSVP anyway, and we will send it out to you. And I picked just a couple of sessions here, but there are many, many other workshops on the actual page, ga.co/back-to-work. So I hope you will join us. And then we have tons of free classes. So you can join again free intro to user experience design after this, if you will still want to learn more, or you can join free intro to user research, or how actually day of life of user experience designer look like. All these sessions are on ga.co/education, like this. And now, without further ado, Dan, it's yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gabriela. I am very, very excited to be here. I am super looking forward to walking you guys through this all. We'll talk a little bit about what this session is. I'll introduce myself kind of to kick us off a little more than just knowing that I'm in San Diego. By all means, I will do my best to be in the chat to actually try to engage with you guys as much as humanly possible. If I do miss something, feel free to repeat it in the chat. But that's our primary vehicle for being able to communicate with one another. So man, that is a younger, more handsome version of myself. And let me be honest, I refuse to change my headshot. One day it's not going to look anything like me, but for now I get to stick with it. I am actually a product manager by training, and there's a lot of overlap between what we typically would think of as traditional UX design, product management. As I mentioned in chat, actually a lot of the early disciplines of UX design were born out of marketing practices, such as things like personas. About 2.5 years ago, I left my full-time job. I was head of product management at a large financial institution called State Street, where I led the development of an AI product called Verus. I left to start a company called Gravity AI. So, and we use as much design practice and UX best practice thinking as possible in going into this. Certainly identified a problem and tried to bring it together. Ultimately, our solution to the problem that I encountered was to build a marketplace for AI, one of the world's first. Prior to State Street, I led product management at Boston Consulting Digital Ventures. I was there for a couple of years building products, working very closely with a multifaceted team of data scientists, what we called at BCG strategic or humanistic designers, which we'll talk a little bit about throughout today's session, as well as more traditional UX designers, as well as engineers and subject matter experts. I am a San Diego native, so I grew up in San Diego. I've got both my degrees from San Diego State. I'll be participating in San Diego Startup Month coming up here very soon, which I'm very, very excited about. And we're kind of headquartered here as a company. Also do a little bit of mentoring through San Diego State's Lab and Entrepreneurship program. So if you are involved at SDSU for any reason and want to get involved in entrepreneurship, definitely recommend checking that out. So what are we doing today? And why do I, as a product manager, get to talk about UX design? Well, it's partially because it's become a very interesting and broad topic that covers a wide range of skill sets. What we're really kind of hoping to cover today is, well, what do we mean by modern UX even? Like, what are the things that we should come out of today understanding? Well, that should be when we say UX designer, what does that mean? How do we think about things like rapid prototyping today at its simplest form? What do we think about when it's maybe overused now, like the hype cycle of the term delightful is definitely coming to its end, but like, what do we mean by making an experience delightful, not just usable? So these are the types of things that we're actually going to be covering today. And hopefully by the end of this session, you feel pretty comfortable saying, okay, I can talk a little bit more fluently about that. What I do want to say is, this is an intro class, right? Like, so we're not, I'm an enterprise instructor for General Assembly on the side beyond my day job. And we'll go into crazy awesome detail when I do like week-long enterprise teachings for some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Today is definitely let's get to understand what UX is at a foundational level. So just to set your expectations, we're not going to be getting into like crazy design theory or information architecture theory. If that's something you're interested in, connect with me on LinkedIn, and trust me, I love it to death. I will talk your ear off. But today we're really saying, like, what is this industry of UX, and how do we think about experience today? Really, what skills do we need to talk about as UX designers, and how has it kind of evolved? So with that, let's dive right in. What on earth is user experience design? What do we mean by it? And I'd love actually for you to let me know in chat. We've all encountered horribly designed things and have a personal experience with good designs and bad designs. One of my favorite examples, and we'll show a couple here in a moment, that I've ever experienced are like early 2000s, late 90s microwaves. Why are there so many buttons on those microwaves? Did anyone actually use the popcorn button? Was the popcorn button something that people like found useful? My biggest anger at microwave design was you had your typical keypad, and a typical user would punch in some numbers and then want to start the microwave. The best invention for the microwave, by the way, that was a good experience, was the instant minute, right? You hit the one button and the microwave kicks up. But on most microwaves of that time, they had so many buttons, dozens of buttons. And the worst culprit was you would punch in your numbers, and right below the keypad on many microwaves was the word cook. So you wanted to make something, you wanted to heat up a bowl of soup, you would hit 300 cook, and nothing would happen, because the cook button is tied to some other function in the microwave. And the button that you actually needed to hit was farther down on the microwave. It was the start button. Oh, I'm so angry at microwaves. Like, who did this? The amount of times I punched in 300 cook and nothing happened just to feel like an idiot and then hit the start button in my life is too many to count. Let me know in chat, what are some of the bad things that you guys have encountered of where you're like, this is poorly designed? What do you think? I'll give you a minute or two to think of a few things. I'll count to 10 in my head. Oh gosh, Hulu's interface. Someone just actually released a YouTube video, or maybe it was a TikTok, like deriding Hulu's interface. It is not particularly good. And a lot of the points that were brought up in that video, I find very true. One of the points was, why does it only show your name on the entry screen on your account? Like there are other people's accounts that could access it, and it only shows your name. I actually thought that I had kicked out my friend who shares a Hulu account with me on accident because of that design choice. Very strange. Mac keyboards don't account for women with nails. I would say that's probably true of many keyboards. I have a bone to pick with Apple, and we typically think of as brilliant designers in these recent years. I'm using a wireless mouse. I'm on a PC at the moment, but there was a time where one of the Mac's wireless mices actually had its connection port to charge it on the bottom of the mouse. So you're basically telling me in order to use this mouse, like I can't charge it at the same time? Come on, Apple, come on, you're better than that. These are great though. I cannot, I have never experienced having to type on a keyboard with nails, but I do imagine that that's a very real problem. I'll do my best to empathize with you. Jen says, visited a beautiful site that must have been calling a custom cursor. Oh no, specified backup cursor. Yep, that's a very interesting problem, and like kind of an accessibility problem in some ways. Food suppliers for restaurants have awfully set up. Yes, I can imagine that like these in between like wholesale food companies, they probably have never once thought that they needed to even care about their website experience. There's going to be at some point when they need to. Yeah, I would love to see a Kerber, your enthusiasm episode about microwaves. I can literally hear the background music while I'm trying to actually operate one of them. Kristen says, you still use the popcorn button in the new convection ovens. Oh, really? They detect whether you have a big bag or a little one. To see it's getting better. Google Stadia, I have not encountered that. Wow, we've got a lot of these, by the way. Anyway, fantastic. Yeah, I think we've nailed the art here of seeing bad design. The only other one that I'll call out is like on doors that require you to push. Why is there a handle for me to pull? Like just put like a sheet down that where I can eat, or at least label it, right? Then I look like an idiot. Here are some examples, right? Like, and you know, some of this is silly, and some of this actually is like quite frustrating. Why is this handicap entrance not a ramp? Like, who made this decision? Who decided? Like, this is definitely a workaround. Ladies, you probably don't know this, but that is this image in the middle is a cardinal sin. Like, that's very uncomfortable. And then, like, this is very clearly confusing as a pay parking machine. There's, you know, when we think about user experience, there's a concept called information architecture. Basically, what information do I need to see first, second, third? How do I create a hierarchy of the information on a page, in this case, a machine, that tells me where to go first? Well, we read things top down and left to right. Why is step one at the bottom and then step two is above it, and then I got to go back? This is so bizarre to me. Who did this? Who hurt you? Who hurt you, pay parking machine? But we've all encountered these throughout our lives. And what we think about when we think about user experience is, how do we avoid this, right? And it's kind of funny, you know, I grew up in the San Diego agency world here at an old agency called Digitaria. And it was right about when I started in the world where user experience design was becoming a thing. We were just transitioning from the term interactive at that time. And a lot of the way that we changed our thought processes about design was beyond aesthetics. How do we make sure that whatever we're designing is making it both usable and delightful for people to actually engage with it. So beyond the look and feel of something, what type of experience does someone have with something? And we use the experience intentionally because it's broad, because it expands sometimes outside of the user interface itself into a multi-channel approach, right? We think about now with websites, where do we communicate with individuals? On our website, through email, through social media channels? How do we integrate all of those experiences together? So it really becomes about much more than the simple design of whatever it is that we're creating itself. There's lots of different terms that pop up in design, and I would say all of these kind of fall now under the UX umbrella or the experience umbrella. So let's spend a little bit of time unpacking things like, what do we mean by usability, UI, user interface, or UX as we're thinking about it today. So I think it's credited with Don Norman, since we were already picking on Apple, but this was many, many years ago, because designers at the time realized that there were aspects of how people were interacting with a system as a whole that were getting ignored by typical things that we would call the early ways that we thought of design. You had like a UI designer or an interactive designer who had a very narrow focus of basically making sure that elements on a page were all there and maybe appropriately sized and the aesthetics looked good. And user experience design came about because there was a recognition that those are what we would call outputs, right? An ultimate screen is an output, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're achieving a larger outcome with your user. A saying in both design and product is outcomes over outputs. It really doesn't matter that we've designed a beautiful website that looks great in output if it's not ultimately meeting a user need or a business need, an outcome. And the term experience is meant to encapsulate an understanding of the outcomes that both as an organization that's building something and as a user, we are ultimately trying to achieve. UI, as one aspect of user experience, is simply the presentation layer, right? So user interface, literally, this is where we actually encounter something on a website, right? Like the blocks, the buttons, it's the interactivity of the product. Let's converse that in with what we mean broader with the experience then. It would be the context with which somebody actually engages with the product. I like to think of this as a spectrum of design skills. On one hand, you've got deep anthropologic research. You've got what I would call humanistic design. And these are design researchers. These are folks who work to understand the context with which somebody is building, working with something. So if I was going to say, I've got a water bottle here, or actually I have a LaCroix here. This isn't talking about the colors of the can or the shape of the can. Humanistic research is, what are the reasons with which I would actually go purchase the LaCroix? Who is someone who would go buy a LaCroix, and what do they care about, right? Very anthropologic in nature. As you move across the spectrum, you get more into the functional aspects of the can. Drop in the chat for me. What are functional or center of the line true, like just experience or functional aspects of the can? What do you think? Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh boy, these are coming in fast. Ayumi kicks in. Yep, the tab, right? Like, is it a tab? Or they could have made some sort of decision to have some sort of bottle cap, or the fact that it's even a cab. A can versus a bottle. The size, right? It's made out of aluminum. I can actually open it and it has somewhere where I can pour it into my mouth. It has a hole for drinking. These are the functional aspects of the can. So we go from what context with which am I a LaCroix person? or am I going to actually buy this? And it is truly a spectrum where they kind of bleed together into how am I actually going to be utilizing this LaCroix, all the way to what we would call the visual design elements or the presentation layer. And again, there's a blurred line. It's not a true separation. What are the visual design elements of my LaCroix on the farthest right end of the spectrum? Yeah, totally. Oh, I love this one. So we're calling out like bright colors, font, yep, logo, copy. All of those are definitely what I would put in the visual design category. What's really interesting is Itzel says color goes with flavor. And this is a perfect example of how it's a blurred line between visual and functional design, right? Like it's a spectrum. The color, this is a lemon LaCroix, has a functional purpose in addition to an aesthetic purpose. It lets me know that it's lemon. And this is how we think basically now of the spectrum of UX, right? Ranging from in what context a true design researcher, an anthropologist, are humans utilizing what it is that I'm building, to what form and function is that going to take, and everything in between, as well as what visual design aspects is that going to meet. Now, along all of that category is the concept of usability. UX isn't just about usability. Usability means that we can actually accomplish a goal that we're setting out to do. We're not failing in trying to achieve a goal. But UX means, how do we make that more delightful, right? And again, in what context do people want to experience this? And what are the constraints? Sometimes what we would call the intersection of desirability, feasibility, and viability that we can actually execute. There's a delightful video, I'll drop it in the chat at the end of the session, of a brilliant usability researcher testing paper prototypes with his daughter and watching her struggle to click things or finding new interactions just on paper prototypes. And he basically gave her a goal and said, can you find how to initiate coloring on this page? That's a usability task. Can you execute something? A UX task, though, or a better understanding of UX would be, well, did I enjoy my experience being able to use this? And that is, a much taller order for UX folks. We kind of categorize all of these around, several different terms, and all of these kind of come together in our UX honeycomb for assessing whether or not we're hitting on all aspects of UX. It's pretty much impossible for us to feel good as designers or product people about every single one of these at any given point in time. But this is what we try to check off, right? From a usability standpoint, can they accomplish the goal at its heart? And one of the reasons why, as a product manager, I think constantly about experience is what I've built valuable? That's a very fundamental question. And believe it or not, one that the design world just kind of ignored for a very long time. And you ended up getting very, very beautiful ghost towns where people would design these fantastic experiences that weren't valuable and no one wanted. So at its core is understanding whether or not what we're doing is valuable. And that's a cross-functional kind of skill, right? Oftentimes UX designers and folks like myself, product managers, play a facilitator role where we're bringing the elements of cross-functional teams together in design thinking exercises to understand each one of these elements of this honeycomb, right? Particularly the idea of, is this something valuable? Let's take a quick look at something really interesting that I don't think many of us would consider particularly aesthetically pleasing. And I'm kind of curious, we all have used this before, right? We all know Craigslist. What's interesting about Craigslist is that it's hardly changed kind of since its inception. It's like this very interesting design time capsule where, obviously it was very community driven for a while, but let's do a quick little fun exercise with Craigslist here. I'd love to know if we're able to actually find something that we're looking for, and then I'd like for you to share out what your experience was like. So pull open up a tab, since we're all remote and all on our computers, and go to Craigslist. I'll give you a second to pull that up. Now, I didn't see that anyone said they were from Alaska in the chat earlier. If you are from Alaska, this is extra pertinent for you. On Craigslist, try to find a listing for a 1-bedroom apartment in Anchorage, Alaska. And I'd love to see if this is something that was how we think about this from a UX standpoint. I'll give you just a minute to pull that up. Those of you who have begun your search, let me know in chat. Which of these kind of buckets does Craigslist hit? Was it usable? Did you find it valuable? Let's say you were a student, or you were moving to Anchorage and you truly needed to find that 1-bedroom apartment in Anchorage. Was it valuable? Did you have any accessibility troubles? Ayumi calls out a very interesting point here when again, on the spectrum of visual design and UX, could a colorblind person see this? Are there accessibility problems? Did it feel credible? What was your experience trying to find that 1-bedroom apartment in Anchorage? Kristen says, some good shipping containers. I am fascinated by that. The idea of, I'm assuming that these are shipping containers that have been converted to living spaces, or not just you're trying to buy shipping containers. That is very, very interesting. Jen says, from a usability standpoint, sometimes doesn't feel credible. Yeah. Well, Jen, that's actually really interesting. Your point here, sometimes doesn't feel credible, but it may be because of the people posting rather than the platform. At what point can you not separate the people posting from the platform? And Craigslist over the years has definitely developed kind of a bit of a credibility problem. And that creates, when we think, I would say, the platform itself, it was usable, you found it, but the credibility problem extends to this broader experience. Should Craigslist, in order to cover this, do a better job within the platform, maybe verifying people's accounts, making sure they're not shady? We have lots and lots of answers to Craigslist that an experienced design team, a product team, said Craigslist has a credibility problem, and as a poor experience around credibility, we can solve that. One of those being something like Angie's List, right, for home repairs, or apartments.com, right, where you've got much more verified accounts. I would argue that verifying people is part of that broader UX experience, and recognizing that that's a pain point falls under our purview. Yep. And here's an interesting one too from Elise. She says it's not necessarily credible because of the visual design. So now we have credibility problems because of there is no feature that necessarily verifies somebody. And we have credibility problems because the design hasn't changed in 15 years and looks wonky. So he says it was quick, easily, and accessible. but you have prior experience with it, right? There are design conventions like search that we have all become familiar with, that Craigslist continues to utilize, or that we've just become very well defined with, such as search, that make it very usable. There was a period of time where hamburger menus on mobile were fairly new, and they weren't a design convention, and people weren't familiar with them. Now we're intimately familiar with hamburger menus. We know to click that 3 little lines, and that's going to open up a menu. But there was a point in time in design where that was not a well understood convention. It had to become one. Defaults to local ISP. So here we have a user experience problem that Claudia is calling out, that falls within, it's an experience problem, but that we would need to work with an engineer on. Yeah, this is great. These are all 100% illustrative of the broad nature now that we think of as user experience design. And I would sum this all back into, are we able to meet the needs of the person that we're trying to meet the needs for, in not just a usable way, but in a delightful way? And Craigslist has a large history around it, but it doesn't really feel that way these days. And I think that's why you saw so many opportunities for other startups to pop up and kind of displace it, like Angie's List, like apartments.com, these other specialized places that are filling a gap that Craigslist does not have. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, this sounds a lot like entrepreneurship and startup mentality, and find a problem and fix it. Love the problem, not the solution. Yeah, it all overlaps. There's a reason, as a product manager, I went into entrepreneurship and started a company. It's because the skill sets that say, hey, there's something wrong with this experience, are the same skill sets that say, hey, I'm seeing a problem and I might want to go build something. So when you think of a UX designer, this is what experience is, but what do you do all day? Well, I would say it probably depends a little bit on where you fall on the spectrum of from kind of the anthropologic research to more of the true UX, the functional design versus visual design. And there's been a push a lot lately that designers definitely kind of encompass every one of these. I know I'm not good at like certain aspects of this design. I am not a visual designer. We have graphic designers on the call today who might not necessarily be good or have the skill sets yet in the anthropologic areas, which I'm very good at, which is user research, persona development, customer journey development. So when we think about like the day in a life of an individual designer, it's going to vary, depend on what you're working on. Do I have any Tesla owners and or fans on? Give me a little shout out. Yes. I think it's I have a Model 3 and I purchased it right when I was starting my company, which was a poor financial decision, but I love that car and I have zero regrets. And a big part of it is, as a lover of experience design, they've transformed the inside of a vehicle. This is much more than a website, right? As an experience designer, someone had to think through how all of the elements come together. Ultimately, culminated into obviously the dash that exists within Tesla today. But like, there are so many things that had to go into making that function from a literal physical standpoint. I love this MRI machine for children. I, fortunately, in my life, have never actually had to have an MRI. I've had many x-rays, but I've been told that MRIs can be quite intimidating and scary, and they make loud noises. Well, as a designer, we're not necessarily dealing with an MRI interface here, but the question is, how can we make an MRI machine less intimidating? How can we better what could be a terrible experience and make it just a little less terrible for a child? And I think this is such a beautiful example of that, of just something that is just a designer doing good in the world by making an otherwise absolutely intimidating machine into something a little bit more whimsical and fun. And then finally, combining different types of technology into something that, for better or for worse, this interesting tunnel experience that you walk through ultimately does facial recognition and is an automated security screening. There are things that are probably very pleasant about that. You just walk through a tunnel, you're not getting patted down, you don't have to put your arms above your head. It does, when I think about the intersection of desirability, feasibility, and viability, is this worth the other side of facial recognition technology? I am in an AI, and we've personally made a decision not to focus on facial recognition technology, but I can definitely see how, like, as an interface or as an experience, it just kind of works here. It's very, very fascinating. So these are three kind of great examples of how experience design falls well outside of websites and apps. It's not just about the interface, right? That's typically what we think of as UI, or just on that visual design spectrum. What we're really talking about, though, is a huge range of skill sets that now fall under this design category. As I mentioned, I am not a great visual designer. I do a lot of wireframing, which we'll talk about a little bit, and paper prototyping, which falls very squarely in UX design, but I am not the person to make something look nice. My visual aesthetic is, I can see good aesthetic, I can't create it. Where I really shine as a product manager and where I fit into the UX world is in research. I have developed expertise in conducting, recruiting, and doing user interviews, usability tests, creating personas and customer journeys, and not just to say we created them, but then actually utilizing them in practice. We've built an entire company around a problem set for a specific type of persona, and we look at that persona on a regular basis to make good decisions. So what I do all day is talk to people. Is what I'm building working for them? How can I improve that? And when I hear something as a trend, I try to translate that into wireframes for both our designer, who I'll collaborate with on, and then ultimately with the engineering team to get it executed. A great example of this was of this type of design activities was from my time at State Street, and even before, when State Street was my customer at Boston Consulting Group. We, State Street approached Boston Consulting Group's digital ventures team and basically said, we want to build a disruptive product. That's it. That's the only guidance we were given. And we went, awesome. Well, where do you start? Where do you start? And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but well, we went and talked to State Street customers. It was very uncomfortable for a lot of people at State Street at that time, because you had someone who looked like me talking to very buttoned up, people in suits, and me and the strategic designers would walk in, pop on the seat, sit cross-legged, and our first question, hey, tell me about your morning. How do you start your day? And our State Street counterparts were in the room. They'd be like, you're not talking about products. You're asking them about their morning. And we ultimately, we didn't get in trouble for this, but there was concern. Why are these weird consultants asking people to tell them about their day? Well, it became very apparent after a short amount of time why that was important for us to understand. Because in just 7 interviews, we started hearing nearly the verbatim thing from every user, and we continued to validate that as we went on. Pretty much everyone we talked to said, these are, by the way, financial professionals that deal with investment portfolios. They said things like, gosh, I get up in the morning, and before I can even brush my teeth, or before I'm even in the shower, I am checking my Bloomberg news feed, trying to make sure that I didn't miss something that is going to impact our portfolio. And I obsess about it. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, tell me about the rest of, they would talk through the rest of their morning. How do you get to work? Well, I take the train, or maybe I drive, and, on the way to work, I got to go through my Bloomberg because news happens so fast that if I miss something, it could drastically impact my portfolio, and I better find out. Finally, what happens when you get to work? Well, they'd say, well, I hope that I had a good rundown of all the news, because two things typically happen when I get to work. One, I'm terrified that someone will stop me in the hallway and say, hey, did you see the latest news about the Delta variant? How's that going to affect our Apple stock? And I go, oh no, what is the latest news? They were terrified that they would miss something. And they had a second scenario that was very similar, where they had what was called a Monday morning meeting, or a 9 a.m. meeting, where they might get cold called in that meeting and called out about whether or not something in the news is going to affect their investments. And this fear was visceral. And it only took 7 interviews for us to say, everyone is saying this. These people don't know each other. They're all saying this. This is a very real problem. It was remarkable. That's anthropologic research. And I didn't design anything at that point. But the way to arrive at that is what we would definitely say falls under the design function. And ultimately, we took that information, translated it into different ways that we might express a solution to that, put it into the designer's hands, who made it not just more functional, but more delightful to use as well. So when we sound like something, when we think about the type of person, I should say, that is fit for design, right? Or fit for experience design, there's a wide range of personality types. I would say that the core things that I look for in a designer, and I literally extended an offer to a UX designer yesterday for my company and are planning on hiring a second designer. The things that I look for are really the curiosity and the desire to understand human behavior and ultimately work to translate that, and obsess over the different ways that we might be able to solve those problems through different elements that our users interact with. Another thing that I would say that's not necessarily illustrated on this slide, but with curiosity comes a understanding of uncertainty, a willingness to say, yeah, I don't know. I don't have the right answer for that. But what I do have is a process to get to that right answer. Again, so much overlap between product development, design, and entrepreneurship these days and how we think about it. But all of it boils down to, I really care about solving a problem for somebody, and I'm going to obsess about the details and how to solve that problem for that person and create the best experience possible for them. If that sounds like you, I am hiring. You can reach out to me, send me your resume. So I did mention, that you should feel very comfortable saying, I don't know how to do something, but here's the process to get there. Because UX is a process. It is legitimately a process. It is a set of skills, but first and foremost, it is a way to align a group of people to get to a common answer. People that love the problem, not the solution, want to find the right to solution for something. So rather than kind of just tell you about the design process, we're going to do this together. You're going to be a designer. You might already be a designer, but you're extra designer for this session. So we're actually going to work through a couple problems together. Very resonant for people who live in New York, like I used to, but a little less so maybe here in San Diego, unless you're in maybe North Park or something, or downtown. But if you've ever used a laundromat, it is a horrible experience for the most part. If you're living in the city and you do not have a washer and dryer in your building, which is most of the buildings in New York, and a lot of the buildings in downtown San Diego, it's a lot of time to get your laundry cleaned. It can take an hour to get your laundry back and forth from a laundromat by itself. Oftentimes you're waiting because people do laundry on the weekends because they don't do it during the weekdays because they're working. And so you end up waiting a long time on Saturday or Sunday. Pricing can vary pretty widely within laundromats, depending on where in the city you are. And oftentimes these things aren't particularly well maintained. So we've got a pretty very real problem here that literally tons of people are experiencing on a regular basis. So what type of user do we have, and what is our challenge here using laundromats as a focus? So we would like to figure out a way to create a solution for kind of city dwellers who are quite busy, who've got a day job, and actually are sick and tired of the laundromat. How might we develop a better wash and fold experience? So enter this concept of wash and fold. So this is where you essentially send out your laundry, if you're not familiar with it, to someone who picks it up. They pick up a big old, trash bag or laundry bag of your laundry. It gets washed and essentially folded back to you in a nice packed manner that's, again, oftentimes delivered to your door. Again, though, there's some problems with wash and fold. Again, pricing can vary widely. Delivery times can vary in terms of whether or not it's easy to get picked up or easy to get dropped off. If you're telling me that there's a 4-hour window that you might pick up my laundry, that could be very difficult if I need to drop it off, on a Saturday before I'm heading to a friend's place or before work. So we want to use wash and fold as a base. But the real question is, and what we're going to work through together, is how do we develop an experience for a wash and fold? So where do we start, right? And I kind of gave it away a little bit, but if you guys aren't hip to XKCD, this is one of my favorite things ever, right? Like, oh yeah, we got to dig into that font. That is the right way to start an experience project like this. Our wash and fold definitely needs a serif font, right? Like, that just commands fluidity. No, we got to start, as is in any design process, the same way that I started the State Street design process: research and trying to empathize with our users as much as humanly possible. Empathy is probably our biggest secret weapon as designers, truly trying to put our own assumptions aside and put ourselves, is in the classic ways that empathy is described, in the shoes of our users. And it's easier said than done. I think a lot of people would claim that they're empathic or claim that they have empathy for their users, but don't put in the energy to identify their own biases and assumptions. It's a difficult thing to do, to really set aside our own beliefs, assumptions about how something should be, and try to understand how something is for someone, and really work to understand how they feel about that situation. But that is what makes us good designers, is our ability to do that and to practice that. We have a lot of tools at our disposal to actually go through that research process. Interviews, my number one tool. Talk to people as much as possible about what it is that you're trying to do and try to understand it. Now, there's some interview best practices for sure, which we'll talk a little bit about, but that's one of our best tools that we can do. Ethnography, so the study of human behavior. So this is where you would go in and actually sit down and possibly watch somebody perform something at work. I did a behavioral study at State Street where I shadowed a chief investment officer of a large hedge fund for a day to see what their day was like. I can't believe they let me do that. It must have been very awkward for them, but I was fascinated. Things like task analysis, like trying to accomplish a goal for something. Hey, if you're trying to get your laundry done, how would you go about it? Probably pretty familiar with things like surveys and focus groups, pretty common techniques. Surveys are good for pulling in, taking, after you've got qualitative data from interviews, trying to dig into some of that data and have a better understanding of it. Focus groups are similar to, obviously, interviews, except in a group setting. There's some tricks there. You have to have a very good moderator. Otherwise, the focus group might get dominated by certain individuals where people don't feel comfortable speaking up. or you end up maybe in group things. So focus groups, while very, very powerful, have to be done correct. And then probably my other favorite and most important tool is data analysis. We have an enormous amount of data at our fingertips. Like, it's crazy how much data I can get on all of you right now on this call. I promise I won't. But what we can do with that data is help us make really good decisions about how better to build our products and how to create more delightful services. So I'm going to pass it to you for a few minutes in our kind of laundromat problem that we want to solve. We're going to start by doing some good user research. And in our case, what are the types of questions that you want to, that you would create to try to better understand things like a typical laundromat user's habits, their behaviors? How would you try to arrive at what preferences that they would have? So let's give you 3 minutes. I'm going to throw on some little Spotify background music while we wait. Then at the end of 3 minutes, I'll ask you guys to share out in the chat what types of questions that you would create to arrive at a better understanding of our laundromat user. All right, dig in. I will talk to you in 3 minutes. The soundtrack for this 3 minutes is going to be Jacob Collier. If you're not familiar, get on the Jacob Collier train.
Hi, I love the way that I feel when you put your arms over me. Oh, hi, hello. Love the way that you get in the groove and you walk with me. Only me. Cause every time I think about it, can't stop thinking about it. That you were all I need.
Hi, I love thinking of all the kisses you could give me if I came around. Hi, I love the illumination you bring to all the ordinary things.
Interesting questions coming in already. I love these.
Cause every time I think about it, can't stop thinking about it. Cause you were all I need. So always thinking in the starlight, underneath the moonlight. Oh no, cause I love your smile and it makes me.
You have some very detailed thoughts about laundry.
I was thinking to the sun, you will always be the one for me. Let your love shine down. Let your love shine down.
Let your love
Okay, that was just about 2 minutes. We can have a couple more of these trickle in. These are great. And please keep putting some of these into the chat as you think of new questions. But we're going to talk a little bit before we dissect these, just about what interview questions, what a good interview question looks like. And believe me when I say, again, I could talk your ear off about this. I have studied this for years, and it is very difficult, believe it or not, to come up with good interview questions. But there's a couple things that we could call out as potential like pitfalls or just general best practices that we can think through. And as we go through these, look back at your question that you created and let me know if, or think about to yourself whether or not you're guilty, your question is guilty of what we're going to be talking about, or if you're meeting some of those best practices. So I don't know if we can use the annotate tool. Drop in chat, which one of these is a better question than the other? You can use the term left or right. Yeah, or one or two, one being on the left, two being on the right. Which one's a better question? We've got a couple on the right, a couple on the left. A little more consensus maybe on the one on the right, but definitely some outliers on the left. This is a really interesting question. So I would definitely say that open-ended questions, there's a lot of different reasons why the question on the right would be considered at most stages of user interviews to be a better question than the one on the left. And one of the reasons is that it's what we would call just a more powerful question, right? And by powerful, we mean yes. This is exactly it. Left is more a yes or no. So you don't get much information out of it. You don't get a whole lot of information from asking a close-ended question like the one on the left. Yeah, sure. I guess I'd like my laundry done. That'd be great using an app. Yeah. The other thing that I've experienced in my, 15, 16 years in product development is if you ask someone that, would they like something to be done in an app? Sure, of course. Would you like a horse delivery service in an app? Yeah, that sounds great. Deliver me a horse through an app. That's wonderful. Do you want me to, like, literally, if you ask anyone about would you like something done in an app, you're almost always going to get a yes. So beyond just the fact that you're getting very little information out of this about what their actual behavior is and possibly leading them, you're probably going to get an incorrect answer here. They probably don't, they don't know whether or not they really want this done through an app. The answer is always, yeah, sure, that sounds great. Everything's done in apps these days. For the describe how you handle your laundry, we learn a lot about that user and what they care about and what they need. Lorena says, I think I would have more questions when I'm told about, yeah, it raises a bunch of questions in their mind too, right? Like they would want to know. Oh no, Jen, is that real? I'm not clicking on that link. Here's you found an app that actually, or a website that moves my horse. Hilarious. Okay, what about this one? So use one or two, one on the left, two on the right. Which one of these might be considered a better question? Either one, tell me about a time you used wash and fold services, or two, how do you usually use wash and fold services? I think this one's a little tougher. I'm seeing a lot of ones, the occasional two here. A pretty good consensus around one, a couple twos. So it is indeed one. So the better question would be, tell me about a time you used wash and fold services. And there's some really good reasons why we do this and why that's a better question than the one on the right. If I said to you as a researcher, tell me about what you usually eat for lunch every day. I might say, oh, I usually eat a salad. I try to eat healthy. I think of myself as a healthy person. I usually eat a salad. What's really interesting, though, is what people usually do versus their actual behavior, what they express that they usually do, research has shown is very at odds with each other. That person it's idealized. Yes, Lynn, that's absolutely it. It's so deeply tied into typically how they view themselves, or even if it isn't, we don't know what we usually do very well. It sounds weird to say, but we don't. So if that same person who said, oh yeah, I usually get a salad. If you ask them, well, what'd you have for lunch yesterday? I said hamburger. What'd you have for lunch before? Chinese food. What did you have for lunch before that? I had that hamburger again. Do you usually have a salad? Similarly, if you asked me, this is very, very much in line with what I think is my favorite illustration of why specific instance questions are so much more valuable towards getting at people's actual behavior. My favorite version of this dichotomy is, what do you plan? What are your workout plans? versus tell me about the last time you worked out. Oh, I'll tell you about my workout plans. I'm going to do 4 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Those are going to be chest, arm day. That's going to be great. You know what? I'm going to get swole. You know what? Tuesday, Thursday, I'm going to work a leg day in there. And you know what? Man, that's 5 days a week. That's what I'm usually going to do. And you know what? Leg day, I'm going to top that off with a nice session of cardio on a Thursday. If you ask me about my usual or my workout plans, that's what I would tell you. If you ask me about my last workout, I would tell you that I walked to the store yesterday and I considered that a workout. I'm very ashamed at this moment to share this with all 44 of you. But I was like, I'm going to get a nice little workout in. I'm going to go for a long walk. Playing with my nephew the other day felt like a workout, but it's been a little while since I've gone to the gym. And I think this is why it's so important to focus on these actual instances, is because we don't know what we usually do. What we usually do, what we're planning on doing, don't very often reflect reality. So if we want to remember, our goal is to empathize with our users and truly understand their behavior. Our goal is to try to understand what they are actually doing, not what they intend to do. And it might be good to know both. But if we really want to understand their behavior, we focus on these actual instances. So I want to send you back into, one more. What are your frustrations with wash and fold services, or how do you feel about wash and fold services? Which one of these is a better question? I kind of gave it away a little bit, but 1 is on the left, 2 is on the right. What do you think? This one's also a little bit tougher. We started out with some 1s and then a lot of 2s. Jen, you bring up a good point. Typically we would say that 2 is a better question here. But I would definitely say that it depends on where in the process you are of trying to figure something out, of solving a problem. 1, what are your frustrations with wash and fold services is a leading question. If you ask somebody about their frustrations with wash and fold services, you're going to hear about their frustrations with wash and fold services. But everyone might be able to come up with something that they're frustrated about, but all in all feel wonderfully about it. What if you ask them, how do you feel about wash and fold services? The same person in 2 different universes. You got to A/B test them. We're now in the Marvel's multiverse, where I've got, Dan A from Earth Prime and Dan B from Earth 102. And I asked Dan A, how do you feel about wash and fold services? Same exact person. I said, you know what? I've actually had a really positive experience with my wash and fold services. The guy shows up, my laundry comes back. It's always super neatly folded and compact, so I can fit it in my drawers. I've had pretty positive experiences. I'm going to continue to use it. If you ask Dan B, who felt that way about wash and fold services from Earth 1.0, whatever I said, I would probably say, you know what? One of my frustrations is that it comes in this plastic wrap that I end up with all this plastic wrap everywhere, I guess. Or I got to call them up and actually talk to an actual human being. Now, one of the reasons that this is more difficult is because those answers could be particularly helpful, right? To know, as Jen calls out here, that you might want to know about the pain points. But if you're trying to really decide on if this is an area where, as an experience, I need to solve this, if you ask a leading question, you're going to get an answer, right? It could be that you ask, hey, how much do you hate X, Y, and Z? And you ask everybody that question, and you get answers about how much they hate X, Y, and Z. But it turns out that all in all, they're generally very happy with the service. So is this something that we should be even spending time on, right? And if you think about it as in the, where to focus on in your own products and experiences. So, Gravity AI is a marketplace for AI tech. That's what I've built. I could ask people, what do they hate about implementing models in their system? And they're going to tell me all about their ML ops process, right? They're going to talk to me about procurement. Parts of that aren't necessarily going to help me about my platform. I really would like to know, hey, how do you feel about trying to purchase third-party AI solutions today? So these are just some interesting things to know as you're creating questions and why it's so hard. And it's the other reason why, if you take one thing out of today's session, that's a punchy saying, it's love the problem, not the solution. Because oftentimes we want to try to prove that our solution is the right one, when in reality, we want to know what is the right way to solve somebody's problem. And it's very difficult when we're attached to something that we're designing to not do these leading type questions, right? Or to say, if you think that people want an app for wash and fold, you say, hey, do you want an app for wash and fold? And you ask 100 people and 100 people say, yeah, sure, an app for wash and fold. That sounds great. You're gonna have this false sense of, wow, I'm really on to the next big thing in wash and fold technology. I should build this app. So it's definitely a difficult skill, and it behooves us to not ask these types of leading questions. So dig back into your research questions, and knowing what we know now, and I saw some of them that I would say kind of straddled the line between some of the things that we just talked about. How might you update your questions? Let's take 2 to 3 minutes. I'll throw that Jacob Collier back on and drop some of your revised questions. Or if you still feel very good about your questions, drop those back in the chat for me.
Cause every time I think about it, can't stop thinking about it.
Can't stop thinking.
You are all I need. So I was singing in the starlight underneath the moonlight. Oh no, cause I love your smile and it makes me feel alright. I was singing to the sun, you will always be the one for me. Let your love shine. Let your love shine out. So I'll be singing in the starlight underneath the moonlight. Oh no, cause I love your smile and let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I will sing it to the sun, you will always be the one for me. Let your love shine out. Let your love shine out. Let your love shine out.
Jacob Mahaley and Ty. We the best alive.
Take another minute and think about how you might revise your questions and what kind of questions you'd want in there. And then feel free to just go ahead and drop those in the chat when you're ready. Okay, let's go through some of these. Yeah, already I think these are these questions are going to get us closer to our end goal, right? Of better understanding our user and their actual behavior. Yeah, what's your experience with wash and fold services? You're gonna get a nice open-ended person describing that. Tell us about the last time you utilized this service. You're going to hear about an actual time that somebody did this. And when I typically ask these types of questions, you have an interviewer who is asking the questions and being attentive to the person, and then you have someone taking notes. And then at the end of all of these sessions, I would typically look through all those notes and try to begin to categorize and codify different things that we heard, looking for common trends. And it's when we start seeing those trends that we know that there's something that we're really on to, as in the case with State Street, this fear of missing something in the news that I just kept hearing over and over and over again. And for this particular instance, we can hear about at actual time with that question that they use the service as well. How does doing laundry make you feel? This is a great ethnographic question, right? You're gonna get a wide range of answers. I know people who love doing laundry. I know people who absolutely hate doing laundry. I know people who love doing laundry but hate folding. I know people who find it cathartic to fold. You might find some niche, interesting like product opportunity through that question. You might recognize that a certain type of person loves certain aspects of laundry. And if you can better facilitate that, you might be able to create a delightful experience for that type of person. I love that question. Describe a time you let someone else do your laundry. That's a really interesting one to get at kind of the heart of some of the things that we suspect might be interesting about or challenging with wash and fold. How do you use your time? Yep, I love that. Tell me about your laundry experience. The last time you did your laundry. When do you do your chores? Perfect ethnographic questions, right? When do you do your chores? Is it on weekends? Do you try to find time? Are your kids or job preventing you to do things when you want to do them? Maybe you find out when they actually want to do them. What is your relationship with environmental practices? Love it, love it. These are great, absolutely fantastic questions. And you can see that like when we go through and try to not do leading questions, it becomes a little bit more difficult to arrive at these, but at the same time, it narrows down the type of questions we can ask. So it starts to reduce our question pool to its most basic questions. And that can make it a little bit simpler as well and reduce the burden on us to come up with constantly really good questions. So we might get some user interview insights like this. And the way that I like to take these interview insights is I'll literally take quotes that I heard and make sure I write those down. I will take keywords and on a spreadsheet, keywords or phrases, I'll begin to kind of classify those keywords or phrases. So in this case, we might hear that I do my laundries on weekends because I don't have time. So I might classify that as a not enough time comment, and I'll have that on a spreadsheet. I sometimes try Yelp, but it takes time to go. So another time takes time to figure out prices, don't have any reviews. So poor reviews or poor quality. I might classify that second half of that as, quality concerns or difficult finding quality services. I don't like that laundry prices can be so different. It's a pain to shop around at a bunch of places, even though I have 4 laundromats within walking distance. So again, this could be quality or variability or knowing which laundromat to go to. So I might try to classify each one of those into its own statement to better understand and look for the trends that I'm hearing across interviews. And amazingly, I said that it took 7 interviews at State Street to come up with recognize this problem that we found. We certainly saw other things, but this was the one that we ended up focusing on. Studies suggest that it doesn't take a whole lot of interviews to uncover major pain points if you do those interviews correctly. And then you can start drilling down into those problems. So let's say that these were real things that people said. You would probably start hearing these same things repeated over and over again if they were real problems that a lot of people faced. It doesn't take that many interviews to actually start to uncover those trends and recognize those problems. It's not a whole big ask. 7 interviews, 7 to 10, that's all you need. So what do we do with that? Well, we've really got to take that and distill it down into a problem statement. Remember, if you take anything away from today, it's love the problem, not the solution. Love the problem, not the solution. And this is probably one of the single most important steps that is out of this beyond researching and empathizing, because if you get the problem wrong, you're solving for the wrong thing. We like to kind of codify these into something that we call the we believe statement or the problem statement. And it's a very simple structure. We believe that this type of customer, so this would be whatever type of customer segment that you've identified, needs a better way to do something. that we've identified from our user research because here's what we heard, or here's what the data says, or here's what our surveys show. So what type of insight did we pull out that supports that we needed to actually meet this need? So based off of our kind of user insights that we have below, granted, these are probably made up, what type, make me a we believe statement in the chat that you, based off of our laundromat problem and these insights below. Take a couple minutes, write one out, sketch it down on a notepad, and then drop it in the chat for me. And we'll go back to some sweet, sweet Jacob Collier.
T3 4 5. If you wanna get sunshine, walking on the rooftop, I'ma go get some. Yeah, we could go dancing, soak up the disco. I dig it when I get that.
By the way, thank you all for staying on with me through this hour and a half session. We've just got 12 minutes left, and really, really appreciate the engagement. Can't wait for the last little 12 minutes we got here.
If you wanna get dirty, slipping on the mudslide, we could cut the chit chat. Give me that. We could skip the border, swim around the ocean. Man, the octopus like when you give me that.
It's a beautiful Sunday evening, and when you see the little moon, you know I'm gonna let it shine on you. Open up the sky, let the world fall down. When I'm alone, out in the sunshine. When I'm alone, it's gonna shine on you.
All right. Jen coming in fast with one here. Jen says, we believe people who work during the week, so that's our audience, need a better way to get their laundry done. Yep, need a better way to do what we're talking about, because it's hard to find a good laundromat that isn't too busy on weekends. Those are our core insights. People say it's hard to find a good laundromat, and we learned that they're busy on weekends. Sounds great to me. I'm a big fan. Lynn says, we believe this customer needs typically we try to define them. I like to actually use persona names in there. So like for Gravity AI, we have a Software Sam persona. So I might say, we believe Software Sam, and I know a little bit about Software Sam, but Lynn says, needs a better way to maximize and plan their time doing laundry. So this is time and planning because laundry on the weekend is stressful. That's our insight. So maybe part of our insights were about timing and planning. Claudia says, we believe a busy customer needs a better way to shop for laundry services. Aha. So this is, we've got 3 different angles and 3 different we believe statements, by the way, and needs a better way. One, this is shop for laundry services because time and costs are important factors in paying for their services. Insights that we pulled out. And we have a couple questions in Q&A that I was actually pointed to. I'm glad that those were pointed out to me. I'll get to those just momentarily. Wonderful. These are fantastic. I'll read Elisa's here and then jump into the next session and these questions. We believe that urban millennials, so I like how we're getting very defined here, need a better way to find delightful laundromats because of consistent stress through the process from selection to laundering to paying. Fantastic. Yep. And finally, Dee says, we believe working people need a better way to access information on laundry services because of time constraints. Very succinct, gets to our core problem and our core user research that we found, which time probably being the #1 thing across all 3 of those. Fantastic. So we've got a couple questions in the question and answer section here. One of them is about asking how many questions you should ask. So more questions, is that a better interview? Is it better to focus on a small number of questions that you will have longer and more detailed answers to? It's very, very important that we're respectful of our interviewees' time and that we maximize that with trying to get at the information that we need. So I think that, in my personal opinion, best practices are to have smaller amounts of questions and try to dig into those. Something that we didn't talk about today is the 5 whys, where you don't just take something at face value. So like someone says something like one of these pieces of feedback, I don't like that laundry prices can be so different. Well, that sounds really good at face value. I might just take it at that, but I'd go, well, why is that? Well, because I can't predict pricing. Well, why is that a problem for you? Well, my paycheck comes at different times in the month. Well, hold on. Now I'm getting into why this person really cares, because their paycheck comes at certain times in the month. Well, why is that not? Anyway, we dig into individual small questions. I think that's a better best practice than having lots of questions. So you start with one group of very well-defined questions and then dig into those. The other reason that I think having smaller amounts of questions is the most powerful thing you can do in an interview is just sit there in silence. Silence and being quiet is like the best tool you have, because what happens? People want to fill that awkward silence. Even me just sitting there for 5 seconds not saying anything, I was like, someone better chime in here. No, because if you're quiet, people will just elaborate more naturally. And having a smaller set of questions lends itself to setting yourself up to allow for more of those gaps. Another question, I know it probably varies, but from your experience, how many questions do you usually have on your interviews? I typically plan for 5 to 7 questions, and then I usually hit 3 to 5. I plan out 7, and then I hit 3 to 5. And that doesn't matter whether or not it's an hour-long conversation or a 30-minute long conversation. I've definitely had situations where I've built out as many as 10 to have enough to go off of, but I rarely find that I'm able to answer all of my questions because it's much more important to me to dig into individual answers and to let people talk rather than me go through the questions that in some cases might need some elaboration. But you don't need too many questions as well as interviewees to get at some of that core stuff. Really good questions, thank you. All right, so at this point, and this is the last thing that we'll be doing for today in our last 7 minutes, we need to generate ideas and actually build a prototype. So we're going to take just a minute here, write down on a piece of paper possible ways that you might actually be able to solve this. So if you have a piece of paper near you or can open up a Word document, divide it into 4 different squares, and I want you to sketch out what you can actually do. Like, it doesn't matter how good of a sketch. I'm a horrible artist. Some of you are actual graphic designers. That's wonderful. I'm a horrible artist. All you need are boxes and words and lines. Sketch something out in an app form or however you want to approach it on a piece of paper in 4 different frames in 4 minutes. That's all you have. And the idea is to get it out as quickly as possible. Back to Jacob Collier, and over to you to do some sketching. And don't worry, I'm not going to make you share it.
Trying to think of something to say, but I've been thinking it's no matter at all. I think we thought of saying nothing before. Yeah, I decided to remember your name. You were avoiding me and it was a shame. Now the time has come for me to admit I don't think I could be your line of best fit. My bed is made of feathers, I'll fall asleep, whatever now. 'Cause I've been sleeping on my dreams, and I I can't remember what I mean to you. And everything is what it seems. I've been sleeping on my dreams. Cause I've been thinking about some things. And I do believe how many days are through. Don't think I'm lost without your wings. I've been sleeping on my dreams. So I imagine we were playing a game. Something like you could be an animal and all I had to do was be tame. I watched you fly around with nothing to lose.
All right.
I thought that was the kind of levitation no person could ever repeat.
So at this point, we are sketching down as many ideas as possible. And in a typical process, you would take one of those ideas and maybe make a slightly higher fidelity version of that, right? Break it out into numerous different parts of it. You might do this as a collaborative sketching exercise. You might just do this individually. You might select one of those best ideas and build out a higher fidelity prototype. But really, all of this can be just sketches. And in fact, I would recommend that it stays sketches for as long as possible until you need it to be higher fidelity. And that's because of Sturgeon's law. This actually came out of science fiction writing. This gentleman realized that 90% of all science fiction is crap. And we decided to adopt this as a fun saying in product development because most of what we do all the time in generating ideas, prototypes is probably pretty bad, and it needs to be just tossed out. And the nature of a sketch, one, makes it extremely fast, but two, we haven't dedicated a lot of time to it. There's no sunk costs into that sketch. So we don't actually have to spend an enormous amount of time. We could just crumple it up. If it's terrible, throw it away. And when I actually do collaborative sketching exercises with my team, they've gotten a chance to know now that they're probably going to crumple up and throw away some of their designs at some point, right? There are no sacred cow designs, right? We crumple them up, throw them out, keep ideating. The other thing that paper prototypes allow for is like we don't have to code, right? Like I know some basic HTML and CSS as a product manager, and I've gotten to learn a little Python over the years, but I am not an engineer by any means. And I have no desire to take our early concepts and actually put them into any kind of a framework online. The most that we like to do early on is a clickable prototype through some of the different types of tools that are available to us, like Figma or obviously InDesign, which is pretty popular. Figma becoming one of the most popular ones now. I feel like designers change what they use all the time. Grizel asked, what's the best program to create prototypes? There are so many out there. InDesign is one of the most popular. It is a great tool. It's really easy to use. If you're just starting out, brand new to like wireframing and design to create prototypes, there's a free tool called Balsamiq. And I remember like digging into Balsamiq and using it to create really fast prototypes. Figma, however, is probably the most common and popular tool that I'm seeing today. That's Figma, Figma. And that's where I'm seeing, do I mean XD rather than InDesign? Oh, that's right. I forgot about they went through a rebrand, didn't they? It's been a little while. We use Figma here, but yes, yeah, I think that was changed. Obviously, so Adobe has a full suite of experience design as well that you can leverage for that. For a long time, people were in the Adobe suite, still pretty popular. So from there, you would develop out your full suite of prototypes. And then, you know what, the next biggest thing is to test and learn. And because we have to, all we have are hypotheses, right? We are design scientists. We are product scientists. The only thing we can do is take our hypothesis that is now on a piece of paper and try to learn what we should do next from it. And that's why you have to have a certain comfortability with uncertainty. And that's why you have to love the problem. If you fall in love with the solution that you've created, that doesn't ultimately meet that the goal of our end user, then it doesn't matter what you developed, right? So the only way to get at that is to actually go through and test and learn something. I was going to have you guys walk through and test your prototype, but we're going to come up a little bit on time. I got a little long-winded. So I do want to walk through. I would encourage you, as you created your own paper prototype, to try to run like a little test on yourself and click through. Like, if I were to click here, what would I expect to see happen, right? Like if I would try to book a wash and fold service on our app, if that's what you designed, what would happen? Make notes of pain points that you would experience. I think this is a worthwhile exercise to do on your own, to see like, oh, that's kind of cool. You'll learn something about your own experience that you might want to then take as a hypothesis to go test. Last thing I'll cover is, what does it actually look like becoming a UX designer? Well, I have good news for you. Demand for designers is monumental. For a while, I was also hiring a data scientist at the same time, and I thought I was going to have a much harder time hiring a data scientist, who are also very in demand. But boy, there is a shortage of UX designers out there on the market, and in huge number of actual open recs. So there's a huge demand for UX. We had a very difficult time finding a designer. Actually, believe it or not, hired someone from General Assembly just because I had connections to them. I lucked out. So that's a good thing. The other thing that's changing the world of UX is that the world of interfaces that we need to create experiences for is expanding. I gave a talk a couple years ago talking about how voice is the next interface. We need people who understand the experience of interacting with things like Siri and Hey Google and Alexa. So what do I do, or in terms of like growth potential? Well, it's also a very high paying position. What we have here, like if you see like associate user designer, like they're still like coming in at 6 figures. Now, I think these are probably New York based salaries, but designers are well paid. And depending on where you are, you're going to see a pretty darn good average salary. A good place to start in the design world are things like agencies, especially here in San Diego, who have tons of local agencies. Digitaria, where I got my start, is now an agency called Mirum. It's one of the largest digital agencies in the world. You've got a number of others here in San Diego. You have Qualcomm, which hires a ton of different designers, as well as obviously a burgeoning startup scene, which we're all looking for experienced designers as well. Quick note on just what all GA has to offer. I think Gabriella covered it pretty well, but there are definitely different types of offerings that you can take from GA. I did hire a GA designer because I believe very much in what GA does, despite not being a full-time GA employee. So you can take full-time classes, part-time classes. I do enterprise trainings for large organizations. Some of them are even San Diego based. And hopefully when the world returns to normal-ish, they'll be back to some on-campus stuff. And I don't want to put words in Gabriella's mouth, but I know that that's an initiative that's trying to happen here in San Diego as well. With that, I would like to open it up to Q&A. I do see a couple questions already in the chat here. Drop them into the chat because I have that open. A book on UX. So I will tell you, it's an oldie but a goodie, and it is the first UX book that I ever loved and read numerous times. It's called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. And it couldn't be a better intro into like the concepts of information architecture and design thinking. I would highly recommend getting your start with Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. He has put out a second version of the book in more recent years because it's gotten a little dated, but the general principles of it remain very, very strong today. I don't want to inundate you with the recommendations. Go with that one. That's the one thing that you should do. Google has a course on UX design on Coursera. Yep, definitely. I have seen folks who have greatly enjoyed that course as well. Any questions for me? Any questions about design, UX, personas, the process, product management, my personal experience in getting into UX? I'd be happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer questions that you might have. Yeah, so the core difference between UX and UI is UX is an umbrella of which user interface would fit just as one component. Because again, user experience might cover that broader range of research topics, while UI is just the development of one possible expression of user experience, which is the user interface design, which typically includes things like information architecture, how to position things on the page, as well as more of those visual design aspects, colors, fonts, etc. How many personas do you try to create for any specific project? The answer is as many as I uncover in my research. I try to actually do create personas that I know I don't want to target. The more typical answer is 3 to 5. If you have too many personas, they become less useful because you've got too specific categories. If you don't have enough, they become too broad and you can't make good decisions on how to better target content or design or whatever features for that individual persona. 3 to 5 is a typically safe number, but again, it should come out of your research. Research and writing, yep, huge part of UX. I think, at Boston Consulting Group, the digital ventures team, there's literally somebody called a strategic designer. All they do is research, and they actually don't create wireframes or actual designs, but they have a title called strategic designer. They do a lot of that humanistic type research that I talked about before. Would it be around the same number of questions that you said are enough to get to the core of the problem? You do have to dig and use that 5 whys technique that I told you about. You can get at somebody in the ethnographic research portion. You might start to see trends after a few questions and 7 to 10 interviews, but then you might want to continue doing research after you've identified a problem that you want to solve in the specific way that you might want to solve it, right? Because you might have lots of different ideas after prototyping that you want to go back and kind of drill into. Typically, you can identify that problem, though, pretty fast, depending on your user space. So user experience would be the direction to go if you're wanting to focus on data and research, not the design and aesthetics. I would say yes, you can. The titles vary differently, but if you definitely want to focus on user research, there are user research designers, or another way that another possible avenue might be product management. A huge portion of product management's time is focusing on data and research, but there's obviously overlap between that and a UX designer. If you do see something that says graphic designer or visual designer, that has a very specific meaning that they are focusing on aesthetics at that point. I'll even ask questions like in my last interview process, I was like, hey, this is going to be 75% UX research focused, but obviously we are building a product here. How comfortable are you with aesthetic design and etc. So I'll typically try to suss that out in an interview process. I think I've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more. How do you measure the impact of your redesign that your redesign had on the people using the product? Anytime you set out to update a product or a feature, you should always try to tie some sort of goal to that. We call them SMART goals. It's our nice acronym that they're typically measurable, specific, actionable, attainable, etc. But we try to tie what are we trying to achieve by making this change, by making this updated design? We start with a hypothesis. The hypothesis takes the form typically of that we believe statement. And then there's lots of different ways to measure that. And anytime you set out on a redesign or an updated whatever, or a new product, you should build into your process how we're going to arrive at, did we do what we were planning on doing, or did this solve somebody's problem? If you do not bake in how we're going to arrive at that information in the beginning, it could become very difficult to do so later. Typically, that might mean at the end of this, we're going to run a survey or reconduct interviews or look at Google Analytics data, etc. I'm going to end on this last question from Grizel. What's the best site to get a job and share a portfolio? Really tough one, but if you had to twist my arm and tell you one site, it would be Dribbble. Dribbble is probably the single best place for designers to share their portfolio and get noticed. Dribble.com, I believe, is almost certainly the best one. All right, we went a little over time, and please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm actually more than happy to answer any additional questions that you might have, and just chat with you guys and participate in the San Diego ecosystem and beyond. Again, my name is Daniel Huss. You'll find a younger version of me in that profile pic on LinkedIn. But otherwise, thank you all for sticking through this with me, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you again.